Good morning, everyone. We begin in Washington, D.C., where the promise of bipartisanship is beginning to look almost laughable on the most pressing issues at hand: COVID, immigration, taxes, and the economy. For example, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says there's no chance Republicans would support tax hikes to pay for President Biden's infrastructure plan. McConnell predicts that Democrats will use the process known as reconciliation to get a tax hike through with a simple majority. That was the same process used to win passage of the president's stimulus package. But Biden is still showing willingness to negotiate. During an interview on ABC, the president signaled a willingness to overhaul the filibuster. It's a Senate rule that allows minority party to block legislation.
Here's the choice. I don't think you have to eliminate the filibuster. You have to do it what it used to be when I first got to the Senate and back in the old days when you used to be around there. And that is that a filibuster, you had to stand up and command the floor. And you had to keep talking alone.
With me now is Bloomberg Chief Washington correspondent Kevin Cirilli. Kevin, good morning. Was there ever a chance of Republicans and Democrats working together?
On economic issues, no. Look, I think that the remarkable headline from George Stephanopoulos' interview with President Biden on ABC News earlier today on the filibuster has ignited a debate here in Washington, D.C. The filibuster, and not to get too Schoolhouse Rock on anyone, but that really has set up the parameters for decades. I mean, it really has. The filibuster, what that rule does is create a difference between the House of Representatives, which traditionally moves very quickly, things go very fast there, and a much more patient, timely manner versus in the upper chamber or the Senate. If that filibuster is tweaked, changed, or thrown out, that would dramatically change the entire congressional branch of the United States government.
Change in what sense? I mean, obviously, it would change the ability for Democrats and the majority party to push legislation through, but what would the material changes the American people would likely see?
Well, you know, and I say this, I mean, we of course are focusing on where we are in this particular moment of history, but okay, play this out 100 years from now.
Right.
Play this out 100 months from now. I mean, let's say that the political pendulum swings back to the right in 2022, and or even beyond that. You know, take it out of our political a moment for where we are. What happens then when there's another party in power and they are able to? One could make the case that the filibuster serves as a check and a balance on the whims of the moment and the political winds of the moment. And so, if this is to be removed, it would make legislation, right, wrong, or indifferent, legislation that is good or bad, be able to be moved through much more quickly.
So, Kevin, when we started our interview, you said that on economic issues, there was never really a chance for Republicans and Democrats to work together. What about when it comes to infrastructure? Is there GOP appetite for a large infrastructure bill?
I think there is, but I think what we've talked about over the past couple of weeks is that infrastructure and economics are just so intrinsically linked. I mean, you can't have one without the other. How are you going to pay for it? And so yesterday, when I spoke with Congressman Andy Barr, a Republican from Kentucky's 6th congressional district, I mean, he was very point blank in saying, you know, Democrats have proposed raising taxes, and that's just not something that they want to see. I think where the Republicans struggle is how they make their pitch, right? I mean, in all of these issues, and I know Tom Keene, my friend and mentor here, will get mad at me for saying this, but I don't want to muddle all of these issues together. But I think when you talk about something like the semiconductor chip shortage, that is a geopolitical issue, it is a domestic manufacturing issue, and it's a political issue as well. Democrats are suggesting that raising taxes would help to boost infrastructure. Republicans are arguing that if you raise the corporate tax rate to 28%, you are going to encourage U.S.-based multinational corporations to look elsewhere in the game for headquartering their companies, to push jobs away from the United States and to push investment away from the United States. If you want to attract investment to the United States from Japan, away from China, from Australia, on these broader manufacturing-linked issues, Republicans are saying that raising the corporate tax rate is just not the way to do it.
Okay, you mentioned messaging, Kevin, so I want to end with messaging and how it shifted on the Republican side and on the Democratic side as well in the last few months as Biden has been president. How do Republicans justify the shift to deficit hawks and immigration hardliners when the Trump administration oversaw this nearly $8 trillion increase in debt? And then, of course, how it infamously handled illegal border crossings, because we are seeing that change in tone. What are Republican sources telling you?
Well, with regards to the first part of that question, I mean, I was just in the Bloomberg terminal, and the debt to GDP ratio, I mean, it's astronomical. To your point, Republicans have not been talking about deficit hawks have not been talking through GOP politics at all. I don't know where they went. I'm like, where's the debates of yesteryear in terms of where this is going to happen? And I think you're going to hear that in the drum up to 2022. They say the best way to get this economy back on track is to reopen. Look at Texas, look at Maryland, look at Florida. And then the second part of your question, what was the second part of your question?
It was about the illegal border crossings, because the Republican tone has absolutely shifted so much.
And look, this has been, let's be frank here, and I know you've interviewed folks on both sides of the debate here, and you've been covering this for several years, Tim. I mean, this has predated the Trump administration. Oh, yeah. It's predated the Biden administration. This has been the one issue, immigration, that has eclipsed policymakers on both sides of the aisle. And let's be frank here. I mean, the business community, Silicon Valley, big business, small business. I think back to the comments that the Business Roundtable has put out in trying to get to the negotiation table on immigration reform. They've got a role to play here. This is an economic issue, but for 3,000 teenagers who are being housed in the Dallas Convention Center because of the immigration crisis, that's the right word for it, crisis in this country, this is a very real issue. Something has to be done. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was on Good Morning America earlier this week. He did not call it a crisis. And look, I think that there's going to be a lot of pressure here on lawmakers on both sides of the aisle that this is now the top issue, the most pressing issue in the short term about what happens on that U.S.-Mexico border.
Yeah, these are people. These are human beings that we are talking about. It is a crisis. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time. Bloomberg Chief Washington Correspondent Kevin Cirilli, thank you, as always.